You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we have Dries Buytaert on the line with us, and a founder at Drupal, also a co-founder at Acquia, project lead there. They're great friends, partners, supporters of the network as a whole. And the kind of the precipice around this was composable commerce. We'd been doing a dinner with Acquia a few weeks back. And, this idea, manifesto that Dries put out last year. And it's just, I think it's very on point and very topical for what a lot of people are thinking about right now. But Dries, I'll kick it over to you. You want to do a brief intro on yourself, maybe a little background?
Sure. Sure.
That'd be awesome. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. But yeah, my name is Dries. There's kind of two parts to my story, I guess. It starts with me founding the Drupal project. And if you're not familiar with Drupal, it's an open source content management system. One of the largest open source projects in the world. Drupal is used by 1 out of 30 websites in the world, actually. And I've been doing that for 21, 22 years, a long time. And actually the first 7 years, it was just a hobby project. That's what I would do at night and on the weekends. And then after 7 years, I decided to turn my passion into my full-time job, so to speak, and ended up co-founding Acquia, as you mentioned. And I've been doing Acquia for about 16 years, also a long time. And at Acquia, I'm the Chief Technology and Chief Strategy Officer. So that's a short version. There's a much longer version, but I won't bore you with that today.
No, that's awesome. I love it. So if we jump into this, and we can make sure if anybody just pings us, we can make sure we just give you a link to it. But during that dinner, I was talking with Steve, and it came up, a composable digital experience manifesto, which, I'd spent some time pouring through, and I thought it was very poignant around what people are thinking about today. And I'd love to kind of just pick your brain on that as a whole around, composable, what it means and your thoughts around that. And we can kind of walk through it. And I think it'll be just a fantastic conversation. And I'll just kind of drop in questions as we go. Does that sound great? What do you think of when you hear composable? Like in your mind, the composable enterprise, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually it was Gartner that I think coined the term composable, but what it means to me, it's essentially when an enterprise is composable, it means that they can easily adapt to changing business needs. And it can do that through what we call a composable architecture. It basically allows them to swap in and swap out different pieces of their technology stack. But there's also much more to that because I think a lot of people confuse composability with modularity, which allows you to swap components or modules. But composability goes beyond that in that it's not just about the architecture, but it's more about a philosophy of doing business, philosophy around agility and governance as well. So you get into things like low code, no code, on top of modularity. You get into things like, at least as it relates to a DXP or a digital experience platform, it gets into like, how do you leverage data across your organization as well? So it's all the things an organization can do to be very flexible and very agile and to adopt and evolve very quickly. That's what comes to mind for me.
And how do people, think about it? Is there, so it seems like we're early on, and if people are doing a self-evaluation, in your estimate, if everybody out there were to do the self-evaluation, how many people would have a composable architecture right now? And then how many people should have it 5 years from now? And is there,
that's a good question.
Because I think there's a lot of, large companies that could really benefit from it, but the lift to get there is going to be quite big, but the benefit on the back end is worth it. But are people today way behind if they don't have a composable architecture, or is this something that's just coming out right now?
I think it's fairly recent. I mean, you have to imagine, like, we've had decades and decades of people building sort of more rigid or inflexible systems, if you will. And definitely today, I think most enterprises, they really crave that agility and that speed that comes with composability. So I think it's early. I think most organizations aren't there yet. But I do believe that sort of in the next 10 years, probably, the majority of organizations will have migrated to a composable model. That would be my prediction. But it's still relatively new, and I think people are hearing about it. People are learning about it, but it's still a little bit in flux too. Like, people don't necessarily understand it. There's not necessarily a lot of clarity yet around all of these concepts. And so I think that's just a sign of it being relatively early,
Yeah, I think, with the pandemic and it thrusting digital into the forefront and all these new tools coming out, and what we've really seen is, everybody wants the flexibility, or they see the newest tool coming out, but they can't use it, right? And they can't use it because it doesn't fit in their tech stack easily, or they're restricted, or the platform, the rigidity of it, or just the self-selecting of platforms that are out there saying, no, you can't use that tool, is really, and with the growth on the direct to consumer and the, everything else and the digital side, like, people, they want the newest, they want the most efficient thing, but they just can't have it. And they're realizing there's a different way to potentially build for the future going forward. And yet they're still faced with a massive tech stack right now that they can't just instantly unwind and start over. And there's just frustration there, I think. But I agree. Like, but do people do you restart? Or is this like, I'm a big proponent for like a digital R&D budget where you can test and learn off to the side. And I don't think a lot of companies have those, but I think they need it to test and learn. And then if something doesn't work, that's fine. You can throw it away. It's what happens with R&D. But every now and again, you get something that's really good and you start building on it. Do you see people like pulling out and rebuilding, or are they building alongside?
No, I think people are evolving into it. Like, it would be a huge effort to like completely change your tech stack sort of, in one swoop. So I think it's much better to kind of go step by step. Every time maybe you're thinking about swapping out a piece of technology in your stack, and make sure you use a composable, solution. And so over time, you'll become more and more composable. So definitely, I wouldn't recommend sort of a massive overhaul. That seems, prone to many challenges.
Yeah. So a couple of things that you were mentioning early on that I want to make sure we get to is like modularity. And, can we dig a little bit deeper on that? Because you're saying it goes, there's things that go beyond just being modular.
Yeah. For me, modularity is at the core, first of all, right? So, and obviously modular software design principles aren't new. We've had modularity for 20 plus years, probably. And so I think it starts with, building, very modular software, and using modular software rather than sort of, monolith software. And essentially, if people, maybe they don't know what modular means, but it basically means your software can be decomposed into smaller pieces, and that each of the pieces, they can talk to each other with, through APIs or, standardized interfaces, if you will. And that essentially allows you to swap out pieces, right? Like, you can swap out one service for another. And as I mentioned, that idea isn't new. But in today's world, there is also a different way of working with modules or components. If you think about what's happening in the JavaScript world, you have NPM and you have, component repositories, and people can pull from, hundreds or thousands of, components, and they can pull them into their software. The same is true for Drupal. We have tens of thousands of modules, and people can kind of mix and match all of these modules or components into an application. But what we've seen is it's not just that we're modular, but we actually allow organizations to manage all of these components. And this is a little bit of the technical piece to it, but the way these things often work is like you have one module that depends on another module, that depends on another module, that depends on another library. And so what happens is you have very complex supply chain management in software nowadays that you didn't have sort of 20 years ago. And that means like if one of these pieces gets updated, it becomes kind of complex to figure out what does it do to all the other pieces. Because one of my modules might depend on a specific version of another module. And if that module gets updated, it kind of has ripple effects through your technology stack. Anyway, long story short, it's not just about modularity, but it's also about having all the tools and the automation and the testing and all the things that you need to efficiently manage a truly modular system where modules can come from many different vendors and many different organizations, right? Because what happens is you're not typically putting together the solutions from a single vendor. In a truly composable enterprise, you're taking components from a lot of different vendors. And so you have to make sure that these things work really well together. And that leads to things like, when you have a composable architecture or a composable solution, when there's things like prepackaged business capabilities, like pre-configured combinations of components. And there's a marketplace where you can actually find components. When there's tooling that allows you to pull in these components and update them, as I explained. So all of these things are kind of layered on top of just modularity, if you will. But it's not even just that, Aaron. Like it also comes down to more low code and no code. Like if you think about in our world, and so Acquia, we're active in the digital experience platform world. So if we think about a composable DXP, it's also about low code and no code solutions, because in our business.
Do you want to elaborate just what you mean by low code and no code, just for people listening in? Yeah.
Yeah. So low code and no code, it kind of generally refers to, I guess, technologies that have a graphical user interface, where people can drag and drop and use WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get kind of approaches to building things. So rather than having to write software, or using sort of the command line, if you will, and go kind of like, do something very technical. The idea of low code, no code is like, how do you empower everyone in an organization to contribute to building things? In our case, is like a good example would be, you could have web developers building websites by writing code, or you can empower marketers, digital marketers, to build websites by giving them sort of an experience in the browser where they don't have to write any code. They can just do everything through the browser or through a UI and kind of drag and drop components on a website to build like a page. That would be an example. And that's actually also an important piece of composability, sort of this notion of low code, no code, because if as an organization you want to go fast, you need to be able to enroll, many stakeholders into building whatever it is that you're building, right? Like in our case, it's about building digital experiences, which is like, could be a website experience, could be other kind of digital experiences. But if you think about it, you're an organization, you have to move fast and you want to build the best possible digital experiences. It's not the engineers that are going to build these experiences. It is the engineers, but you want to enroll everybody in your organization to think about what is the best possible experience. And you want to enable everyone, people in customer service, people in sales, people in marketing, anyone really. You want to enable all of these people to take advantage of the technology stack that they have to build the best possible customer experiences. And that's what low code, no code does.
That's going to be a monumental shift for organizations as a whole. If you can empower the customer service side to update a page, right?
Mm-hmm.
To test and where I think about it, just my background as a chemist, I want to
Mm-hmm.
experiment. And
Right.
experimentation currently can be very, very hard.
Right.
Because, hey, I want to try this. Okay, I'm going to send it out to try to have them do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to try this. I want to update it. If I can update it on my own near real time and
Mm-hmm.
test and learn, I'm going to get to the
Right.
next best digital experience faster than anybody else is, because they're
That's right.
using an antiquated system.
That's right. Yeah, and this has been a long trend. Actually, if you think about it, like the invention of the graphical user interface also goes back a long time ago. But still, I think there's a long way to go. If you think about, we just talked about digital experiences, but like most companies have a lot of data. They have data in, hundreds sometimes of different data stores, whether it's spreadsheets or CRM systems or, data warehouses, all of these things. Think about how many people in the organization can actually use all of that data. And that's a little bit like this notion of low code, no code applied to data. Like, I think in the future, organizations will have unified data layer where all of their data can be mixed and matched, and many people in the organization will be empowered to kind of explore that data and do things with that data. Like today, most organizations are not there, right? Like one person may have access to one data store, another person may have access to yet another data store. Often you probably have to run some SQL queries or have a data scientist to go kind of crunch some data. At the same time, you see things like Domo and Tableau, they're starting to change that. And so it's kind of early, but you can also see like sort of an end state where everybody will be able to, be empowered, and if you have that kind of unified data and you can use low code, no code techniques on that data, now that data becomes between quotes very composable. And the same thing is true for content. We have a lot of content in a lot of systems, email marketing system, website systems, intranets, you name it. All of the data right now is in silos. It's not unified. It's not well integrated. It's not accessible to everyone in the organization, and not everybody can just contribute to updating and maintaining it. And so that is also part of the vision for Composable. So again, start with modularity, managing all these modules, but then it's like, all right, how do we bring other non-code aspects together too, data, content, and how to enable low-code, no-code approaches to doing things with that data, content, and code.
Yeah, if you're
a lot of
any
words.
sizable organization, no, it's awesome. It's, because where I think people are stressed out right now, it's like you're talking about, there's data everywhere. Okay, well, how do I think about that data and what do I do with it? And the first thing is like, okay, we dump it all into one data layer. Okay, now what? So now you've turned all these data lakes into like great big data oceans, and we still don't have anything but, and then what do you do with it and what's the usefulness of it? Well, if you've got the modularity in place, right? And you've got the ability to use and or interchange or swap out, you can now test and learn and change and find out what you want to do with all the data, and then you can make it actionable. And,
That's right.
And if you actually low code, no code, I just go back to the customers, the customer care person who can manage their own page and can manage their own interaction and can test and learn to see what's best. You've now, like you were saying, you've empowered the entire organization outside of, I just have to do a simple request and hopefully mine gets put in queue at the right time. And if it doesn't, it maybe never gets done. Maybe I'm number 457, right, on the update list. And
that's exactly it. And when I said in the beginning, it's kind of a philosophy as well as an architecture. That's what it comes down to, really. It's like that empowerment, that enablement, that agility, that resiliency too, that comes from this kind of approach.
It's awesome. Then we get to the experience piece, right? Like what does the content management look like, right? Because if those two things go together in my mind. You've got content, and then there's personalization, and there's delivering experiences. And those can be automated, or like we talked about, they can be, you can have somebody actually going in and crunching data and doing the manual shifts. Like, how do you look at like the content management side? Yeah, I would love to hear.
Sure.
I'm trying to number one, thank you. Cause this is like, you're helping all of this make sense. And you're right. I agree. It's what'd you say? It wasn't it wasn't a methodology. You were saying it's,
philosophy.
A philosophy, right?
Yeah.
That leads to an architectural design, which leads to an implementation, which leads to an execution, which leads to testing and learning, and constantly iterating over and over again.
Yeah. Well, so to answer your question, so as it relates to content management and digital experience management more broadly, the holy grail, I would say, in our world is how do you deliver the right information to the right user at the right time on the right channel, And that sounds easy. I can say that in one sentence, but in order to make that happen, it's actually fairly complex. And so in order to do that for us, there's kind of two fundamental building blocks, or three, depending on how you define it. But first, you have to have great content that you're going to deliver, the right content that you're going to deliver to people. But then you also need to have data. And the data in this case is, a user profile information. It's information about the person that you want to deliver the content to. Because, I have to know your preferences or your intent or what you're trying to achieve. That could be as simple as your language preference, or it could be like you're in the middle of buying something and you have a very specific interest. And if I know that, I can deliver the right content to you, and also in the right channel, because sometimes it could be web as a channel. Other times it could be email. It could be a chatbot. It could be, any digital channel, really. So it's all about having all the content in kind of one place, so you can use all the content that you have in your organization. And you want that content to be, reusable and composable in a way so that it can be streamlined for each channel, because the way you deliver a text message is very different than how you would deliver content on a website. Obviously, each channel has its kind of form factor, and, you can be more lengthy on a website than you can be in a text message, for example. So you need to have really good grip on all your content management capabilities. On the other hand, you have the user profile data, the data that I described. And that's actually not that easy too. And that's where goes back to what we just talked about. Like most organizations, they have user data everywhere. They know a little bit about you in their email marketing system. They know a little bit about you in their CMS. They know a little bit about you in their CRM, maybe in their e-commerce system. They have some maybe transactional data as well. But these things tend to be silos today. Like these systems aren't integrated. And a funny example is so my main language is Dutch. And so I remember going to a website and they asked me what's your language preference? And I said Dutch, and the website switched to Dutch, which was great. But then literally the next day I would get an email in English. So it's a good example of sort of the data being siloed and not being well integrated. Now for me, that was not a problem because I can speak Dutch and English. But let's say for my grandparents, that's a missed opportunity. That's a missed opportunity to deliver them a great digital experience because they speak Dutch, but they're not really well versed. They only speak very basic English, as an example. So that integration of the data is pretty key. And so a lot of it starts with having all your content in one place in a reusable format, and then also having all of your data integrated so that you have a true understanding of the end user and breaking down the silos. And that goes back a little bit to the other conversation too, like if you think about most organizations, and I'm sure it's true for maybe nearly all of the organizations that you work with, they have a website, they have an email marketing system like Marketo, let's say. They may have an e-commerce platform. And guess what? They have a website team, they have an email marketing team, and they have a commerce team. Like there's even organizational silos around these tools. And that's because these tools aren't really composable. They're not really meant to kind of work together, to be swappable. And so a big part of the future is also like, or maybe put differently, success could be that these organizational silos disappear because everybody's thinking about how do I create a great experience, and it doesn't matter what the underlying tools are. You know what I mean? Like, it should just be fluid in a way, like a website experience and an e-commerce experience. Like, why is it completely different teams? Well, it's only because today the tools actually force or encourage kind of organizational silos too.
Yeah, I think there's still, I completely agree. And then in each of those silos, they're all looking for service providers, right? They're looking for different tech tools to meet their own individual needs because there's not an overarching plan. So in the absence of the overarching plan of this is what we're going to do, this is, the philosophy we're going to follow here, they just find what's best for them, right? And therefore you get these then silos that are making, tech solution provider decisions in silos, which then just further complicates everything. But, to give them some grace, a lot of grace is, when the pandemic hit and everybody scrambled and the orders given out were get a DC website up and running and get it going as fast as possible and, maximize e-commerce. And there's a bunch of people that ran to Amazon and did that. And they ran to, then the direct to consumer side. And they're just, we're doing regular dinners on tech stack rationalization because it's so crazy at this point in time. Everybody signed up for every quote unquote silver bullet that was out there. And so, they've been tasked, they executed it, but now we're at a time where things are just slowing down a little bit and we can take a deep breath and take a step back and say, what do I really need? And not just what's the best, right? For the next, 6 months, but what is the best for the organization as a whole? And I think you're right that there needs to be that holistic plan in place. And I don't know if that falls to the CDO. I mean, a lot of people still struggling. Where do we put e-com? Where do we put digital? But then that can then help make the decision on, okay, I need an email marketing tool. Is it composable or not?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yes or
and
no.
How easy it is to add to your technology stack.
Yeah. And have that be a defining factor. And although it might not be the current easiest one for you to use, it's immediately most effective. The fact that you can plug it in and move it and use it however you want is more beneficial. But
that's right.
Right now, we really need to have some companies really win in the composable space and go from like digital 2.0 to digital 4.0 and everybody stand up and say, how'd they get there?
Right.
In my mind, the only way you can really get there is if it's composable. I don't see at this point in time how you, as fast as technology is changing, how you can iterate, test and learn, have organized data, have, as well as organized content to distribute based on personalization. There's a lot of tools out there, but they're disparate. You have to have kind of what you're saying. They all have to work together.
Right. And that's a challenge. Yeah. I remember so when COVID happened, we had some, large pharmaceutical companies as customers actually at Acquia. And one of them that was creating a vaccine, a COVID vaccine. So they quickly needed to add e-commerce capability to their site, which they didn't have before. And because they were using Drupal, they were able to just kind of install the commerce component. And it was very easy for them. Installing the component and configuring it was probably just a day or so or less of work. The challenge, they did have a challenge in full transparency with like scaling it. So because they had so much traffic that actually most of the effort was like, now we need to scale this, this platform. to be able to handle a tsunami of requests, but actually getting the commerce platform installed and up and running happened in a day. There wasn't a long procurement process. There wasn't like teams of consultants coming in, for weeks and weeks to build an integration that didn't exist yet. It was just a matter of, literally just installing the component through an automated process. And I think it is kind of like what we've always called best of breed, but sort of next gen best of breed, But I think it's going to be a while before software vendors have evolved to that model, and I think everybody is slowly but steadily evolving. It doesn't happen overnight, It's like a whole different level of integration, different kind of architecture you have to build. All these things.
Yeah, I mean, there's the simplistic monolithic platforms that work well for a certain group, and then I think there's this whole next level that's happening, and the demands that are driven and the volume and the potential revenue from those larger companies are going to put a lot of pressure on these tech and service providers to change how they're thinking about developing new products. And
exactly.
If the current ones don't update, we're going to see out of nowhere a new, email marketing tool replace, Marketo, a Klaviyo, whoever it might be, a new SMS tool replace Attentive as the leaders in this space. And it's going to happen overnight. And those companies, they better be sitting back, like thinking, how do we fit into this? And they're going to lose the upper end. Or there's still going to be the lower end, but I mean, as they push upper mid-market to upper market enterprise level, I mean, this is the way that it has to go. And it's like, this isn't like, the great thing about this is it's not pushing a platform. This is just a philosophy of how you need to think about the future and future-proofing your digital efforts.
That's right. And in all fairness, there's a lot of advantages to this, but there's also some new challenges that come with this too, because while there is a certain simplicity to it on one hand, there is also complexity to it on the other hand, and I kind of referenced this idea of sort of the software supply chain. I mean, it's not a new idea, but that is increasingly becoming more important, because as you use component-based architectures, that you may be using 200 different components, or 500 different components in your technology stack. Like, in each of these components, when they come from different vendors, they may have different levels of security standards, or there might be a security issue in one. And so, like, how do you manage that whole kind of supply chain of software in terms of security? So it goes hand in hand with solving these problems too, right? So it's like, we want to get to that world. At the same time, we have to evolve how we build software, how we manage software, how we secure software. All of these things are still early. I think there's a reason why software supply chain management software is doing so well right now. People are starting to see the need, and honestly, a lot of this was originally, I would say, driven by open source. As organizations were starting to use open source components for lots of different things, now they had an external dependency on an open source project that they needed to manage. Versus in the old world, people built every line of code in-house. It was all managed and built by a single vendor. That's not the world that we live in anymore. So,
yeah. Something that comes up, I'm just thinking of like questions from the brand side, what they might be thinking. Mock comes up quite a bit in the composable space. There's commerce tools out there talking about, composable commerce. Do you want to jump into just, Mock as a whole?
Yeah. Mock is, for those that don't know it, it's kind of an alliance of vendors, I would say, that all subscribe to a certain architecture. I think it stands for microservices, APIs, clouds, and headless. So it's a collection of vendors that use a microservices API cloud headless approach, which is very well aligned with composability, I would say, because it makes them very composable. Like you can, for example, when you're a headless content management system with APIs, you become more swappable, if you will. You can swap out one headless content management system for another. So in that sense, it's very very well aligned with this trend. Now, I will say that Mac typically is more about the architecture, and you can tell from the words, microservices, API, cloud, headless. These are technical words. So it's a little bit less about that philosophy, and it's more about sort of the architectural characteristics of what they all stand for.
Are there other like terms that are out there that people are going to start hearing about that are they should be aware of?
Yeah, I think in a way what's happening a little bit that the monoliths are being kind of decoupled or unbundled in a way in a set of smaller components. So like your traditional content management system, now you have a headless backend for the content repository, and you may have another tool for building the experience or the presentation of the website, right? Where these things used to be like one thing, now they're like two things or three things or four things. And so you have a variety of different technologies. You hear about the Jamstack as another example, which is it's basically a decoupling of the front end and the back end, as I just described, where typically for the front end, people use JavaScript frameworks. But you have things like experience orchestration tools. Like you have a lot of things. And each of these products or services, they're designed with composability in mind. So I think you'll start hearing that more and more. And these are just examples in my world, in my industry, which is kind of website development and digital experience delivery. But the notion of the composable enterprise applies to other categories of software too. It's not limited to DXPs or website software. So I'm sure that in these other categories, there's other kind of things that will emerge because of this that I don't know the names of. So
what is there any I've been picking your brain. Any questions? I mean, kind of, where I sit just advising brands on a daily basis, and then trying to put together like knowledge sharing sessions. But like, you have any questions for me? I always like to give people the opportunity to ask back.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious what are some of the emerging trends you see, with brands and how they're thinking about their technology stack? Is there any other trends that are outside of this, or that are all the main trends aligned with this?
I think in a way, the main trends are aligned with this. There's a massive amount of frustration with the inability to go with best in breed of whatever it might be. And at the same time, though, very few people have this in place, have the composability piece in place. I mean, if they do, they're usually, multi-billion-dollar multinational companies that have the money to spend on it. But a lot of people are looking at the composable side and saying, hey, first step is just headless, right? And how can I start breaking this down? But even in that aspect, there's still a lack of awareness and education about what it really means. And that's not their fault. They've been so busy, right, for the past 3 years that they've just been trying to keep their head above water. And now they have a little bit, things are slowing down a little bit. I have a few, maybe 15, 20% of brands really taking off right now, doing great in Q1. But a lot are, kind of slowing down, and they're able to take that step back. And as they're going through it's also, the Q1. So they're, re-upping with vendors, and they can't switch. And they can't switch because it's too hard, or their platform doesn't allow for it. Or there's not an API, or there's not a plugin.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a little bit of frustration, but in all honesty, there's a little bit of, I'm glad, because I didn't really, I wanted to go there, but I didn't want to go through the pain of going there. So I'm glad there's a reason I can't go there. And now I'm going to go focus on something else.
Oh, something else. Yeah.
And then, when you look at who was handling digital for the longest time, is it got dumped to like the marketing team in a lot of cases. And you look at what happened with digital marketing, like there's very few roles who have changed as much over the past 3 years as the digital marketer around content they need to get, where they need to get it from, how much they have to regulate it, how much they have to get. And by the way, we want KPIs, we want metrics. We just tripled your budget. We need what the return on ad spend is, and it's just nearly, by the way, there's so many more platforms and TikTok rolls out, right? And third-party cookies going away. It's like, they're like, oh my God,
so much
next?
Change. Yeah. There's so much change at the same time. Everybody needs to do more with less.
Yeah. And
the real challenge. Yeah.
Right. And so what I think the cool thing is this isn't pie in the sky stuff. This is stuff that's going to work. It's just a little bit further down their roadmap, but most of them, if they could snap their fingers, they would be here tomorrow. But getting the organizations on board, especially, all right, well, I've got to have somebody, where's all my data going to be kept? Right? Like, how am I doing all that? And I need to get that data layer put in place.
That alone can be a multi-year effort for many organizations.
Right. And so they need to get there's certain things that need to be in place. One of the, this has been fantastic. Like, I can't thank you enough. This has clarified so many things. Like, this is something you can flip on, but it has to have that whole organization kind of built into it, because you are starting multi-year projects that if they're not done, this doesn't quite work how you want it to be. And I think there's going to be a lot of organizations like, hey, I'm going composable, and they don't have that data layer in there, right? Or they don't have the experience manager in place. And so you don't have the data, you don't have the personalization capabilities, you don't have the experience, capabilities to put it out there. There's these things that need to be put in place, and then you can roll it out, and it needs to be started on now if they're not started on it. Now, I mean, there's mid and smaller tier companies, they can get by with a simple platform. And, but any large organization, you have to be started.
You have to start because it's going to take you a while to get there. But if you don't have like your data, for example, if you don't have it in unified at some point, it's going to really hold your business back.
You can't afford not to do it. You can't afford not to.
Yeah. Today they don't have it unified, most of them, but if you can kind of tell, like, the value of having it unified is going to be massive, because if you don't unify it, you're not really going to know your customers, as an example. You're not going to be able to deliver the best possible experience, because these things go hand in hand. So you have to get on the path, to unify your data.
So who takes them down?
Otherwise it becomes...
Who takes them down that path? Right. Is there like who?
I think who in the organization? Sometimes I think that vision can come.
And then who's the partner they use to help them get there?
Yeah. Well, I think for data, I think it often starts with like a CIO or somebody in the organization that is in charge of systems and or data. But how you get there, I think there's multiple solutions and multiple vendors. I think there's not one way to do it. There really isn't. But like it might be interesting for organizations to start just by assessing where they are and where they need to go, and just to have a map, the map of where they have to go. I don't think most organizations have that. And like, how do you make sure that every year your data gets in a better and better shape, step by step?
With all the rationalization going on,
right?
How do you prove that this is, the return on investment? The return on investment's not going to be for 3 years.
Yeah. No, that's the hard part, I think, for many,
Yeah. Well,
it's like, that's why I think that's why I said in the beginning, I think it makes more sense. Like, let's say a website, just to go back, because that's the world that I live in. But, most organizations rebuild their websites, I don't know, every 5-6 years. Like there's a new CMO, first thing he or she does is like, well, let's rebuild the website. And I think that's a natural moment, it's a natural moment to say, all right, let's make sure that we move forward with the right kind of platform that gets us, on the journey. And I think the same is true for a lot of other systems. Every once in a while, you probably go like, well, we have to rebuild our CRM, because our Salesforce instances become completely unwieldy or something. Like, I think my point is there's these natural points where you're gonna replace things or upgrade things or kind of re-envision, even if you stay with the same vendor. Maybe then is the moment. It's like a natural moment to kind of advance kind of the composable strategy.
Yeah. What gets you most excited? Like,
So for me, it actually goes back to low code and no code and to what you said about large organizations, only large organizations being able to do this. But like what gets me excited is kind of this notion of how do we democratize these things? How do we enable everyone in an organization to contribute to building the business through low code, no code, but also how do we democratize a lot of the software so that it's not just for the largest and most profitable companies in the world, but how do we bring these ideas to the mid-market and to SMBs, So that is exciting to me. Like, the whole trend is exciting. Like, how do we actually put it in the hands of everyone? That's exciting, but it will be a journey.
It will be. Awesome. Well, this has been so much fun. Thanks so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
And yeah, I'll probably reach out to set up another one because I'm going to digest all of this. But there were so many clarifications just for me that I can't thank you enough. I love to help other brands out as well. And this is going to completely help me explain it as they're asking questions as a whole. But with that, I think we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Dries, again, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Great friends, partners, supporters of the network. Thanks everybody for tuning in to this episode of the Digital Deep Dive.